Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at attention in the pristine corridors of the Galactic Defense Coalition headquarters on Kepler Station. The artificial gravity hummed beneath her boots as she waited outside Colonel Vextar's office. Through the transparent aluminum walls, she could see the Zentaurian officer reviewing her medical exemption request on his holographic display. The station buzzed with activity as personnel from dozens of species moved through the corridors. Tall, blue-skinned Altarians glided past with their characteristic grace, while the insectoid Zephyrians clicked and chittered in their native tongue. Sarah had grown accustomed to being one of the few humans on the station, but today she felt particularly isolated. Colonel Vextar's voice echoed through the comm system, sharp and dismissive. "Enter, Lieutenant Chen." Sarah stepped into the office, her military posture perfect despite the constant ache in her left shoulder. The colonel's forearms were crossed as he leaned back in his chair. His reptilian features twisted into what passed for a sneer among his species. "So, Lieutenant," Vextar began, his translator rendering his words in perfect standard, "you're requesting exemption from combat readiness training due to injuries?" He emphasized the last word with obvious skepticism. "Yes, sir. As documented in my medical files, I sustained significant injuries during the Proxima campaign that limit my physical capabilities in certain areas." The colonel's laugh was a harsh, guttural sound. "The Proxima campaign? That was 18 months ago, Lieutenant. Surely a young human like yourself has healed by now." He gestured with two of his arms toward the massive viewport behind his desk, where the blue-white glow of the nearest star illuminated his scaled features. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "Sir, with respect, some injuries don't heal completely. The medical documentation clearly states medical documentation can be creative," Vextar interrupted, rising from his chair. His imposing 8-foot frame cast a shadow across the desk. "I've seen too many soldiers, human and otherwise, use phantom injuries to avoid their duties. The Coalition needs warriors, not excuses." Around them, the station's daily operations continued. Through the office walls, Sarah could see maintenance crews of various species working on the massive weapon systems that protected this sector of space. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was surrounded by the very weapons she had once operated with deadly precision. "Sir, I assure you that my request is legitimate." "The injuries I sustained were 18 months ago," the colonel repeated firmly. "And from what I understand about human physiology, you should be as good as new by now. Your species is known for its remarkable healing capabilities." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists at her sides, but she forced them to relax. The colonel had clearly made up his mind before she'd even entered the room. She had encountered this attitude before, the assumption that humans were either incredibly resilient or complete weaklings, with no middle ground. Furthermore, Vextar continued, pacing behind his desk with predatory grace, "Your combat record shows that you were quite effective during the Proxima campaign. 3 enemy vessels destroyed, 2 boarding actions repelled, and you were part of the team that disabled the hegemony's primary command ship. Hardly the record of someone with debilitating injuries." The mention of Proxima made Sarah's shoulder throb with phantom pain. She could still smell the acrid smoke of burning circuits, still hear the screams of her crewmates as the enemy plasma bolt had torn through the bridge of the UES Defiant. The memory of dragging her wounded captain to safety while her own blood soaked through her uniform was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. "Those actions," she said carefully, "came at a significant cost, sir. The cost of war, Lieutenant. Something every Coalition soldier must be prepared to pay." Vextar's tone softened slightly, but his skepticism remained evident. "Look, I understand that humans form strong emotional attachments to their experiences. Your species is notorious for its sentimentality. But in the Coalition Defense Force, we cannot afford to coddle personnel based on psychological trauma disguised as physical limitation." Sarah's vision narrowed slightly. The casual dismissal of her sacrifice, the reduction of her genuine injuries to mere sentiment, sparked something dangerous in her chest. But she had learned patience in the fires of real combat, and she held her tongue. "Sir, if you would review the detailed medical scans." "I've seen enough medical scans to last 3 lifetimes, Lieutenant. What I haven't seen is evidence that you're anything more than another human soldier, trying to avoid the harder aspects of military service." Vextar returned to his chair and leaned forward, his 4 eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. The office fell silent except for the ambient hum of the station's life support systems. Outside, a transport ship was docking at one of the lower pylons, its cargo holds likely filled with supplies for the war effort. The war that Sarah had already given so much to. The war that had left invisible scars across her body and soul. "I'm denying your request," Lieutenant Chen, the colonel announced, his decision carrying the finality of judgment. "You will report for standard combat readiness training at 0800 tomorrow. If you're truly injured, the training will reveal the extent of your limitations. If you're malingering, it will expose that as well." Sarah stood perfectly still, processing the decision. Part of her had expected this outcome, but it still stung. The casual dismissal of her service, the assumption that she was somehow trying to avoid her duty, felt like a betrayal of everything she had endured for the coalition. "Will that be all, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "One more thing, Lieutenant." Vexitar's expression shifted to something that might have been curiosity. "I'm particularly interested in seeing how you perform in the close-quarters combat scenarios. I've heard that humans have a reputation for creativity in desperate situations. Let's see if that reputation is deserved." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah recognized it for what it was. Not just a test of her physical capabilities, but a test of her character, her resolve, and her right to wear the coalition uniform. "Understood, sir." "Will there be anything else?" "Dismissed, Lieutenant." Sarah saluted crisply and turned toward the door, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's training. As she walked through the corridors of Kepler Station, past the alien faces and foreign customs that had become her second home, she made a silent promise to herself. Tomorrow, Colonel Vextar would learn exactly what kind of warrior humanity had forged in the crucible of the Proxima campaign. The combat training facility aboard Kepler Station hummed with activity as Sarah arrived at 0755 hours. The massive chamber stretched for nearly 200 meters in every direction, its adaptive surfaces capable of simulating any combat environment from urban warfare to zero-gravity boarding actions. Holographic projectors lined the walls, ready to create enemies, obstacles, and environmental hazards at a moment's notice. Already assembled were a dozen other coalition personnel who had been assigned to the same training session. Sarah recognized most of them, a mix of species representing the coalition's diverse military forces. There was Korath, a massive Thurian whose rocky, crystalline skin made him nearly immune to energy weapons. Beside him stood Zillaneth, a graceful Vorthan whose 6 arms could operate multiple weapons simultaneously, with deadly precision. The group also included 3 other humans: Marcus Webb from Earth's Luna colonies, Elena Vasquez from the Mars Defense Corps, and Jin Watanabe, a veteran of the asteroid mining conflicts. They nodded to Sarah as she joined the formation, their expressions showing solidarity with their fellow human. "Attention!" Colonel Vextar's voice boomed across the training facility as he strode in, flanked by 2 training sergeants. His 4 arms carried a variety of training equipment, and his reptilian features showed the same skeptical expression he had worn during their meeting the day before. "Today we will be conducting comprehensive combat readiness evaluations," the colonel announced, his gaze sweeping across the assembled personnel. "Each of you will be tested in multiple scenarios designed to evaluate your tactical thinking, physical conditioning, and ability to adapt under pressure." Sarah stood at attention, feeling the familiar weight of her training uniform. The synthetic fabric was designed to monitor vital signs and stress indicators, providing real-time feedback to the training supervisors. She could feel the sensors making contact with her skin, including the raised and damaged tissue beneath her left shoulder blade. "We will begin with individual close-quarters combat assessments," Vextar continued. "Each participant will face a series of increasingly difficult holographic opponents in hand-to-hand combat scenarios. Performance will be evaluated on speed, technique, adaptability, and endurance." The first few participants were called forward, and Sarah watched as they engaged with the holographic enemies. Korath's massive frame allowed him to simply overpower most opponents, while Zillaneth's multiple arms created a whirlwind of defensive and offensive techniques that was mesmerizing to watch. When Marcus Webb's turn came, Sarah paid particular attention. The Luna-born human was compact and quick, using Earth's martial arts traditions to great effect against opponents twice his size. His performance was solid, earning approving nods from the training sergeants. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Vextar called out, his voice carrying across the facility. "You're next." Sarah stepped forward into the designated combat zone, a circular area marked by glowing lines on the floor. Around her, the holographic projectors activated, creating a realistic urban environment complete with debris, shadows, and ambient sounds. "Computer, initiate combat scenario 7 Alpha," Vextar commanded. "Single opponent, moderate difficulty." The air shimmered, and suddenly Sarah faced a holographic hegemony soldier, its insectoid features rendered in perfect detail. The enemy carried a plasma rifle and moved with the characteristic quick darting motions of its species. Sarah fell into a combat stance, her movements fluid despite the constant ache in her shoulder. The holographic enemy fired, and she rolled to the side, using a piece of simulated debris as cover. Her tactical mind, honed by months of real combat, immediately began calculating angles, distances, and opportunities. She feinted to the left, then darted right, closing the distance to the enemy in 3 quick bounds. The holographic soldier swung its rifle like a club, but Sarah ducked under the swing and delivered a precise strike to what would have been its solar plexus if it were real. "Hit confirmed," the computer announced. "Opponent neutralized." "Impressive," one of the training sergeants muttered, but Colonel Vextar's expression remained skeptical. "Computer, initiate scenario 12 Delta. Multiple opponents, high difficulty." This time, 3 holographic enemies materialized around Sarah. 2 hegemony soldiers and one of their massive shock troopers. A creature that stood nearly 3 meters tall and carried weapons in each of its 4 arms. Sarah's heart rate increased, but her movements remained controlled. She had faced odds like this before, in real combat where failure meant death rather than just embarrassment. The first soldier charged, and she used its momentum against it, redirecting its attack into one of its companions. The shock trooper opened fire with 2 of its weapons, forcing Sarah to dive behind cover. But instead of staying defensive, she immediately began moving, using the holographic environment to her advantage. She grabbed a simulated piece of debris and hurled it at the shock trooper's head, not expecting to cause damage but knowing it would force the creature to react. As the massive enemy flinched, Sarah closed the distance and attacked its legs, bringing it down to a more manageable height. Her movements were economical, precise, and deadly effective. Within minutes, all 3 holographic opponents had been neutralized. "Excellent performance," the training sergeant announced, but Colonel Vextar stepped forward. "Computer, initiate scenario 18 Omega, maximum difficulty." A murmur went through the assembled personnel. Scenario 18 Omega was typically reserved for special forces evaluation, and it was designed to push even the most capable warriors to their limits. 5 holographic enemies materialized, including 2 shock troopers and a hegemony assault specialist equipped with personal shielding. The simulated environment also became more complex, with multiple levels, moving obstacles, and environmental hazards. Sarah felt her shoulder throb as she moved into position, but she pushed the pain aside. This was no longer just about proving her combat readiness. This was about proving that her sacrifice at Proxima had meant something, that she was still the warrior she had always been. The battle was intense and brutal. Sarah used every technique she had learned, every lesson written in blood during the Proxima campaign. She turned the environment itself into a weapon, using explosive debris to eliminate one shock trooper and collapsing a simulated wall to crush another enemy. But the assault specialist proved more challenging. Its personal shielding deflected her attacks, and its advanced weaponry forced her to constantly move and adapt. During one particularly desperate moment, as she dove to avoid a plasma burst, Sarah felt something tear in her shoulder. The old injury, aggravated by the intense movement, sent a spike of agony through her entire left side. For a moment, her vision blurred and she stumbled. The watching personnel tensed, thinking the evaluation was over. But Sarah gritted her teeth, forced herself upright, and continued fighting. She adapted her technique, compensating for her compromised mobility with increased tactical awareness and precision. In the end, she defeated the assault specialist by luring it into a trap, using the creature's own aggression against it. When the last holographic enemy fell, the training facility fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's labored breathing. "Combat scenario complete," the computer announced. "All objectives achieved. Time 6 minutes 14 seconds. Evaluation: exceptional performance under extreme conditions." The assembled personnel broke into spontaneous applause, recognizing a truly remarkable display of combat skill. But Sarah barely heard them. Her shoulder was on fire and she could feel warm moisture spreading beneath her training uniform. Colonel Vextar approached, his expression unreadable. "That was quite a performance, Lieutenant, though I notice you seem to favor your left side toward the end." Sarah straightened, forcing herself to ignore the pain. "The scenarios were challenging, sir, but manageable." "Manageable?" Vextar's tone carried a hint of surprise. "Lieutenant, you just completed one of our most difficult combat evaluations in record time, while apparently dealing with some form of physical limitation." Around them, the other personnel were being dismissed, but several lingered to offer their congratulations to Sarah. She accepted their praise graciously, but her attention remained focused on the colonel. "Sir, as I mentioned yesterday, I do have some physical limitations resulting from my service at Proxima. However, as you can see, these limitations do not prevent me from performing my duties effectively." Vextar studied her for a long moment, his four eyes reflecting what might have been newfound respect. "Perhaps, Lieutenant, we should discuss the nature of these limitations in more detail." The medical bay aboard Kepler Station operated with the quiet efficiency that characterized all Coalition facilities. Soft blue lighting created a calming atmosphere, as automated medical scanners hummed softly in the background. Sarah sat on the edge of an examination table, her training uniform replaced by a standard medical gown that left her shoulders and upper torso exposed. Dr. Thelvar, the station's chief medical officer, moved around her with the precise grace typical of his Andorian species. His pale, elongated fingers manipulated the scanning equipment with practiced ease while his large, dark eyes studied the readouts with professional concern. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his melodic voice carrying the slight accent that marked him as coming from the core Andorian worlds, "I must say that your performance in today's training session was quite remarkable, considering the extent of your injuries." Colonel Vextar stood near the viewport, his forearms crossed as he watched the medical examination. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by something closer to curiosity, though he remained silent as the doctor worked. "The plasma burns along your left shoulder and back have healed remarkably well," Dr. Thelvar continued, running a scanner along the damaged tissue. "However, the nerve damage is extensive. You should be experiencing significant pain and mobility issues." Sarah kept her expression neutral as the doctor's scanner traced the network of scars that covered nearly a quarter of her upper torso. The burns had healed into smooth, pale ridges of tissue that stood out starkly against her natural skin tone. Some areas remained completely numb, while others sent occasional jolts of phantom pain through her nervous system. "The pain is manageable, doctor," she replied simply. "Manageable?" Dr. Thelvar's eyebrows raised in his species equivalent of surprise. "Lieutenant, according to these scans, you have nerve damage that should make it impossible to raise your left arm above shoulder height without excruciating pain. Yet during your combat evaluation, I observed you performing complex maneuvers that required full range of motion." Colonel Vextar stepped closer, his interest clearly piqued. "Doctor, are you saying that Lieutenant Chen's injuries are more severe than I was led to believe?" "Colonel, I am saying that Lieutenant Chen's injuries are severe enough that most species would be medically retired from active duty. The fact that she not only continues to serve but excels in combat situations is extraordinary." The doctor activated a three-dimensional holographic display that showed Sarah's skeletal and nervous systems in detail. The damage was clearly visible as areas of disrupted neural pathways and altered tissue density along her left side. The plasma bolt that caused these injuries struck at close range during the boarding action on the Hegemony command ship, Dr. Thelvar explained, manipulating the hologram to highlight specific areas of damage. The initial impact vaporized portions of her shoulder blade and caused third-degree burns across approximately 18% of her upper body. Sarah watched the clinical display of her injuries with detached interest. She had seen these scans before, during the long months of recovery and rehabilitation, but she had never seen them through the eyes of someone who was just learning the true extent of what she had endured. The emergency surgery required replacing damaged bone with synthetic implants and grafting new skin over the burned areas, the doctor continued. But the nerve damage was too extensive for complete repair. Lieutenant Chen should have limited mobility, chronic pain, and reduced strength in her left arm. "Should have," Colonel Vextar repeated slowly, "but clearly does not." Indeed. What makes this case particularly interesting is how Lieutenant Chen has adapted. Watch this. The doctor activated another scanner and had Sarah perform a series of simple movements. The holographic display showed her neural pathways in real time, revealing how her nervous system had essentially rewired itself around the damaged areas. Remarkable, Vextar murmured. Her nervous system has created alternate pathways to compensate for the damage. More than that, Dr. Thelvar said with obvious admiration, she has trained her remaining functional nerves to work at approximately 130% of normal efficiency. It's as if her body has learned to do more with less. Sarah remained silent during this clinical discussion of her adaptation. She remembered the months of physical therapy, the hours spent relearning basic movements, the frustration of trying to perform simple tasks that had once been automatic. What the doctors called remarkable adaptation had felt like a daily battle against her own body. There is something else, Dr. Thelvar said, his tone becoming more serious. The location and pattern of these injuries tells a story. Lieutenant, would you mind explaining exactly how you sustained this damage? Sarah glanced at Colonel Vextar, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. During the final assault on the Hegemony command ship, our boarding party had successfully penetrated their bridge. Captain Morrison was planting the quantum charges when a Hegemony shock trooper broke through our perimeter. It had a plasma cannon aimed directly at the captain. She paused, the memory as vivid as if it were happening again. I was the closest team member to the captain's position. The trooper fired and I intercepted the blast. Intercepted? Vextar's voice carried a note of disbelief. I threw myself between the plasma bolt and Captain Morrison. The blast struck me instead of him. Sarah's voice remained steady, but her eyes held the weight of that moment. The captain completed the mission. The command ship was destroyed, and the Hegemony fleet lost coordination. The battle was won. Dr. Thelvar studied his scans with new understanding. Lieutenant, this impact pattern, you didn't just happen to be struck by enemy fire. You deliberately placed yourself in the path of a weapon that you knew would cause severe injury or death. Yes. The simple acknowledgement hung in the air. Colonel Vextar moved closer to the holographic display, studying the injury pattern with his 4 eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been awe. You saved your captain's life by using your own body as a shield. I did my duty, Sarah replied simply. Your duty. Vextar's reptilian features shifted into what Sarah was beginning to recognize as deep thought. Lieutenant, in Zentorian culture, we have a concept called Velthar, the willingness to sacrifice oneself for the greater good. It is considered the highest virtue a warrior can possess. He turned to face her directly, and Sarah was surprised to see what looked like respect in his alien features. But even among my people, who prize martial valor above all else, deliberately taking a plasma bolt to protect another would be considered an act of extraordinary courage. Dr. Thelvar nodded in agreement. The courage required to make that choice is one thing, but to survive such an injury and return to active duty. Lieutenant, I have been practicing medicine for over 40 years across dozens of species. I have never seen anything quite like this. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the admiration in their voices. To her, she had simply done what needed to be done. Captain Morrison had been essential to the mission's success, and her sacrifice had ensured that success. The mathematics of the situation had been simple, even if the consequences had been painful. Doctor, Colonel Vextar said, given what you've shown me today, I believe I owe Lieutenant Chen an apology, and perhaps a different assignment than standard combat training. Actually, Colonel, Dr. Thelvar interrupted with a slight smile, I believe Lieutenant Chen has proven that she requires no special accommodations whatsoever. Her performance today suggests that she has not only overcome her injuries but has actually become a more effective warrior because of them. The scanner in the doctor's hand continued its quiet, humming as he completed his examination. Outside the medical bay's viewport, the stars wheeled slowly as Kepler Station maintained its orbit. In a few hours, Sarah would return to her regular duties, but something fundamental had changed in how others saw her. More importantly, something had changed in how she saw herself. The officers' lounge aboard Kepler Station buzzed with quiet conversation, as the evening shift change brought a mix of personnel together. Sarah sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of synthetic coffee while reviewing tactical reports on her tablet. The events of the day had left her emotionally drained, and she welcomed the relative solitude of the dimly lit space. "Mind if I join you, Lieutenant?" Sarah looked up to see Colonel Vextar approaching, carrying his own beverage in one of his 4 hands. Gone was the skeptical expression he had worn during their first meeting. Instead, his reptilian features showed something that looked almost like uncertainty. "Of course, sir," Sarah replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Vextar settled into the specially designed seat with fluid grace. His species required different ergonomics than most humanoids, and the Coalition had long ago learned to accommodate the diverse physical needs of its personnel. For a moment neither spoke, the silence filled only by the ambient hum of the station's life support systems and the distant conversations of other patrons. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant," the colonel finally said, his voice lacking the authoritative tone he typically used. "My assessment of your situation was incomplete." Sarah set down her coffee and studied her superior officer. "Sir, you were working with the information available to you. I understand your skepticism." "No, Lieutenant, you don't understand." Vextar's 4 eyes focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. "My skepticism wasn't based on available information. It was based on prejudice." The admission hung between them. Around the lounge, other Coalition personnel continued their conversations, unaware of the significant moment playing out at the corner table. "Sir?" Vextar took a sip of his beverage before continuing. "In my experience, humans have a tendency toward emotional responses to combat trauma. Your species forms strong psychological attachments to your experiences, and I have observed many human soldiers who allow these attachments to limit their effectiveness." Sarah felt a familiar spike of irritation, but kept her expression neutral. "With respect, sir, psychological adaptation to trauma is not unique to humans." "No, but the way humans process trauma is different. Most species either compartmentalize their experiences or allow them to be processed by their social structures. Humans internalize everything. You carry your experiences with you in ways that other species find difficult to understand." The colonel paused, studying the swirling patterns in his drink. "I assumed that your injury claim was another example of human emotionalism interfering with military efficiency." "I was wrong," Sarah considered his words carefully. She had encountered this attitude before. The assumption that human emotional responses were somehow inferior to the more detached approaches of other species. It was a perspective that ignored the strengths that came with human emotional investment. "Sir, may I ask about your own combat experience?" Vextar's laugh was a low, rumbling sound. "Centaurians are bred for warfare, Lieutenant. We are hatched in communal pools and raised by military collectives. Combat is not something we experience, it is something we are." He gestured with 2 of his arms toward the viewport that dominated one wall of the lounge. Beyond the transparent aluminum, the swirling colors of a nearby nebula painted the darkness with ethereal beauty. "I have been in combat for over 30 standard years. I have seen worlds burn and fleets shattered. I have killed enemies with my bare hands and watched comrades die beside me. But I have never—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I have never deliberately placed myself in harm's way to protect another." The admission clearly cost him something. Sarah began to understand that this conversation was about more than just her medical exemption request. "Self-sacrifice is not unknown among Centaurians," he continued. "But it is always tactical, always calculated. We sacrifice ourselves when it serves the greater strategic objective. What you did, throwing yourself in front of that plasma bolt, there was no strategic benefit. You saved one man at the cost of severely injuring yourself. The captain was essential to the mission's success," Sarah pointed out. "Any competent officer could have completed the quantum charge placement. The mission would have succeeded even if Captain Morrison had died." Vextar's tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes showed something deeper. "You saved him because he mattered to you personally." Sarah felt the truth of that statement settle in her chest. Captain Morrison had been more than just her commanding officer. He had been a mentor, a friend, someone who had seen potential in a young lieutenant from Earth's outer colonies and helped her develop into an effective warrior. "Yes," she said simply. "That is what I don't understand about humans," Vextar continued. "You make decisions based on personal connections rather than purely tactical considerations. By all rational measures, it should make you weaker warriors." He activated a small holographic display on the table, showing the tactical breakdown of the Proxima campaign. The data showed engagement statistics, casualty rates, and effectiveness ratings for different species serving in the coalition forces. But the data tells a different story, he said, manipulating the display to highlight human performance metrics. Human units consistently outperform tactical projections. You take casualties that should break unit cohesion, but instead become more effective. You form bonds with other species that should create communication problems but instead enhance cooperation. Sarah studied the data with professional interest. She had never seen a comprehensive analysis of human performance in coalition operations, and the results were impressive. During the Proxima campaign, human units accounted for only 12% of coalition forces, but achieved 37% of successful tactical objectives, Vextar continued. The correlation between human emotional investment and combat effectiveness is undeniable. What are you suggesting, sir? Vextar deactivated the holographic display and leaned back in his chair. I am suggesting that I have been thinking about warfare in terms of individual capability, rather than collective strength. Centaurians fight as perfect individual warriors who happen to be organized into units. Humans fight as units composed of individuals who care about each other. The distinction was subtle but profound. Sarah had never consciously analyzed it, but she recognized the truth in his observation. Every human unit she had served with had developed a familial dynamic that enhanced their effectiveness beyond simple tactical coordination. Your injury, Vextar said, returning to the original topic, represents something my species struggles to comprehend. You voluntarily accepted permanent damage to yourself to protect someone you cared about. That decision should have made you less effective as a warrior. But it didn't. No, it didn't. If anything, it seems to have made you more effective. Your performance today was exceptional by any standard, but it was also informed by experiences that most warriors would consider traumatic. Sarah touched her left shoulder unconsciously, feeling the familiar texture of scarred skin beneath her uniform. The injury taught me to adapt, to find new ways to achieve the same objectives. It forced me to become more efficient. More than that, Vextar said with something approaching wonder in his voice, it connected you to something larger than yourself. You fight not just for tactical objectives, but for the people those objectives will protect. The colonel stood, finishing his drink in a single swallow. Lieutenant Chen, I am reassigning you to the Special Operations Training Division. Your experience with adaptive combat techniques and your understanding of human psychological dynamics make you uniquely qualified to help develop training protocols for mixed species units. Sarah felt a surge of surprise and gratitude. Sir, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for... Lieutenant, Vextar interrupted with a slight smile. You took a plasma bolt to protect your captain, and then returned to active duty more effective than before. If that doesn't qualify you to teach others about resilience and adaptation, I don't know what would. As the colonel walked away, Sarah remained at the table, processing the unexpected turn her career had taken. Outside the viewport, the nebula continued its ancient dance across the cosmos, beautiful and eternal. But for the first time since Proxima, Sarah felt like she was moving forward rather than simply enduring. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood before her first mixed species training class in the Advanced Tactical Simulation Chamber. The room had been reconfigured to accommodate the diverse physical requirements of coalition personnel, with variable gravity fields, atmospheric controls, and environmental adaptations that could shift in real time. Her students represented the full spectrum of coalition military forces. Korath, the crystalline Thurian she had trained alongside, sat next to Zilaneth, the six-armed Vorthon whose graceful movements belied deadly combat skills. A squad of human marines from the Martian Defense Corps occupied one section, while a team of insectoid Zephyrians clicked and chittered softly in their own formation. Today we're going to discuss something that most military academies don't teach, Sarah began, activating the room's holographic display system. We're going to talk about the difference between surviving combat and transcending it. The assembled personnel shifted with interest. Traditional coalition training focused on tactics, weapons proficiency, and species-specific combat techniques. Sarah's approach was something entirely different. Computer, initiate historical simulation Proxima 7 Alpha, she commanded. The chamber transformed around them, recreating the bridge of the UES Defiant during the final moments of the battle. Smoke filled the air, emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the sounds of combat echoed from multiple directions. Sarah watched her students react to the chaos with professional interest. "This is a recreation of the moment when I was injured," she announced, her voice calm, despite the simulated destruction around them. "Computer, pause simulation." Everything froze, creating a tableau of destruction. A holographic plasma bolt hung in the air, caught in the moment before impact, while Sarah's younger self was captured mid-leap, throwing herself toward certain injury. "Who can tell me what I did wrong in this situation?" A human Marine raised his hand. "Ma'am, you positioned yourself in the path of enemy fire without adequate cover." "Correct." "Anyone else?" Zelaneth's musical voice carried across the chamber. "Lieutenant, you sacrificed tactical positioning for emotional objectives. By standard doctrine, you should have maintained your assigned defensive coordinates." "Also correct." "Any other observations?" Korath's rocky features shifted as he spoke. "You acted without coordinating with your unit. Individual heroics compromised team effectiveness." Sarah nodded approvingly. "All excellent points. By every military doctrine taught in every coalition academy, my actions were wrong. I violated tactical positioning, compromised unit coordination, and allowed emotional factors to override strategic thinking." She moved through the frozen simulation, her students following. The holographic environment allowed her to point out specific tactical errors and explain how a more rational approach would have been superior. "Computer, resume simulation and show the calculated optimal response." The scene played out again, but this time showed what would have happened if Sarah had followed proper protocol. The plasma bolt struck Captain Morrison, killing him instantly. Other team members moved to complete the mission, but the lack of Morrison's experience led to a 43-second delay in quantum charge placement. According to tactical analysis, this delay would have allowed enemy reinforcements to reach the bridge. Probability of mission success would have dropped from 96% to 61%. The simulation paused again, and Sarah studied her students' faces. She could see them processing the implications. "So my tactically incorrect decision actually improved mission outcomes, but that's not why I made it." She activated another display, showing psychological profiles and bonding assessments for human units throughout the coalition. Humans form what psychologists call pack bonds with their unit members. These bonds create emotional investment that influences tactical decision-making. Most species view this as a weakness. A Zephyrian training officer chittered a question in its native language, and Sarah's translator rendered it as, "If emotional bonds compromise rational decision-making, why do human units consistently outperform tactical projections?" "Excellent question," Sarah replied. "Computer, display comparative effectiveness data for the Proxima campaign." The holographic chart showed unit performance across multiple metrics, broken down by species composition. The data revealed a clear pattern. Mixed units with human components performed significantly better than predicted, while purely alien units performed exactly at projected levels. The emotional bonds that humans form don't just affect individuals, they enhance unit cohesion across species lines. When a human is willing to die for their alien teammates, it creates reciprocal loyalty that strengthens the entire unit. She gestured toward Korath and Zelaneth. "Both of you have served with human units before. Have you noticed any differences?" Korath's crystalline features reflected the chamber's lighting as he considered the question. "Human units respond to casualties differently. When Thurians lose a warrior, we acknowledge the loss and continue mission parameters. When humans lose a team member, they fight harder." "It's more than that," Zelaneth added with her species' characteristic grace. "Humans grieve for their losses, but they also fight to prevent future losses. They extend their protective instincts to include non-human team members." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. Human emotional investment creates a multiplier effect that enhances overall unit performance. But it comes with costs." She touched her left shoulder unconsciously, feeling the familiar texture of scar tissue beneath her uniform. The same emotional bonds that make humans effective also make them vulnerable. We take risks that other species wouldn't consider, and we carry the consequences of those risks. The simulation chamber reconfigured itself, creating a modern tactical scenario with mixed coalition forces facing a simulated hegemony assault. Sarah divided her students into teams, ensuring each group contained multiple species. "Your mission is to secure the enemy command center while minimizing casualties. You have 30 minutes. The exercise began with typical coalition efficiency. Each species contributed their natural strengths: Thurian durability, Vorthon speed and precision, Zephyrian tactical analysis, and human adaptability. But as the scenario progressed, Sarah watched for the moments when doctrine would be challenged by circumstance. 15 minutes into the exercise, one of the human Marines was killed by simulated enemy fire while attempting to rescue a wounded Zephyrian. The remaining humans immediately shifted their tactical approach, becoming more aggressive and taking greater risks to protect their alien teammates. "Pause simulation," Sarah called out. "What just happened?" The team leaders looked uncertain. The human squad leader spoke first. "Ma'am, we lost Peterson while attempting casualty evacuation. Standard protocol would be to leave the wounded and continue the mission. But you didn't." "No, ma'am. We adapted our approach to ensure no further casualties while still achieving the objective." Zilaneth added her perspective. "The humans became more protective of all team members after losing one of their own. It should have slowed mission progress, but instead they found more efficient solutions." Sarah activated a tactical analysis display showing the team's performance metrics. "Your unit efficiency actually increased after the simulated casualty. You began coordinating more closely, sharing information more freely, and adapting to each other's capabilities in real time." She looked around the assembled students. "This is what human emotional investment brings to coalition forces. Yes, it sometimes leads to individual sacrifices that seem tactically unsound, but it also creates a level of unit cohesion that pure doctrine cannot achieve." The simulation resumed, and Sarah watched as the mixed species teams began to operate with increasing coordination. Humans continued to take calculated risks to protect their alien teammates, while the other species began to reciprocate with their own forms of protective behavior. By the end of the exercise, every team had successfully completed their objectives with casualty rates well below projected norms. More importantly, the post-exercise interviews revealed that the alien personnel had developed genuine emotional investment in their human teammates' welfare. "This is what makes humanity valuable to the coalition," Sarah concluded as the simulation chamber returned to its neutral configuration. "Not our technology, not our tactics, but our ability to transform a collection of individuals into a family, willing to fight for each other." As her students filed out of the chamber, discussing the lessons among themselves, Sarah remained behind for a moment. The scars on her shoulder ached with phantom pain, a constant reminder of the price she had paid for her beliefs. But watching alien warriors learn to care for each other the way humans did, she knew that price had been worth paying. 6 months after her first training session, Sarah found herself in the Coalition War Council chambers, presenting her findings to the highest levels of military command. The vast circular room housed representatives from every major coalition species, their varied physiologies accommodated by specialized seating and atmospheric controls. Admiral Thorne, the human commander of coalition forces, sat at the central podium, her weathered features reflecting decades of military service. To her right sat General Vaktor of the Zentorian military caste, his forearms folded as he studied the holographic displays floating above the council table. The other council members represented a spectrum of alien perspectives, from the hive-minded Nexari to the silicon-based lithoids. "Lieutenant Chen," Admiral Thorne began, "your report on enhanced mixed species unit training has generated considerable interest throughout Coalition Command. Please summarize your findings." Sarah activated her presentation, and the chamber filled with three-dimensional tactical displays showing unit performance data from the past 6 months. The numbers were impressive by any standard. "Admiral, over the past half year, units trained in emotional bond tactical coordination have shown a 38% improvement in mission success rates compared to traditionally trained forces. More significantly, casualty rates have decreased by 42% across all species." Murmurs of interest rippled through the assembled council members. General Vaktor leaned forward, his reptilian features showing keen attention. "Lieutenant, these improvements seem to correlate with increased human integration into mixed units. Are you suggesting that human emotional responses enhance military effectiveness?" "Not exactly, sir. I'm suggesting that when humans are allowed to form genuine bonds with their alien teammates, it creates a cascade effect that enhances everyone's performance." Sarah manipulated the display to show specific case studies, For example, Unit 774 included 3 humans, 2 Thurians, 2 Vorthons, and 1 Zephyrian. After 12 weeks of bond-focused training, they performed a simulated hostage rescue with 0 casualties while achieving all primary objectives. And without such training? Asked Counselor Zethra, her Nexari hive voice speaking for millions of linked minds. Traditional coalition units with similar composition have a predicted casualty rate of 18% for equivalent scenarios, with a 73% mission success rate. The council chamber fell silent as the implications settled. These weren't marginal improvements. They represented a fundamental shift in military effectiveness. Lieutenant, Admiral Thorne said carefully, you're describing performance improvements that seem almost too good to be true. What's the catch? Sarah had been expecting this question. Ma'am, there are several significant challenges. First, the training process is emotionally intensive. Personnel must be willing to form genuine personal bonds with beings from radically different species. Not everyone is psychologically suited for this approach. She activated another display showing psychological assessment data. Second, units trained in this method become extremely close-knit. They resist reassignment and suffer significant morale problems when members are transferred to other units. In other words, General Vaktor observed, you create military families rather than interchangeable tactical units. Yes, sir. And like families, they become protective of each other in ways that sometimes conflict with broader strategic objectives. Counselor Lithex, representing the silicon-based lithoids, spoke with the slow, measured cadence of his species. Lieutenant Chen, you yourself exemplify this protective behavior. Your injury at Proxima resulted from prioritizing individual welfare over tactical positioning. Sarah nodded. That's correct, Counselor. The same emotional bonds that enhance unit effectiveness can also lead to tactically suboptimal decisions in crisis situations. Yet, the overall results suggest that these suboptimal decisions actually improve outcomes, Admiral Thorne observed. How do you explain this paradox? Sarah had wrestled with this question for months. Ma'am, I believe it comes down to the difference between theoretical optimization and practical adaptation. Traditional tactical doctrine assumes rational decision-making under stress, but actual combat situations are chaotic and unpredictable. She activated a complex tactical simulation, showing multiple variables in flux. Units that prioritize emotional bonds develop better intuitive coordination. They anticipate each other's actions, compensate for individual weaknesses, and adapt to changing circumstances more quickly than purely doctrine-driven forces. You're describing something that resembles the Nexari hive mind coordination, Counselor Zethra noted with interest. Similar, but different. Nexari coordination is based on shared consciousness. Human-influenced units develop coordination based on shared emotional investment. Both achieve superior tactical outcomes, but through different mechanisms. General Vaktor activated his own display, showing Zentarian military doctrine. Lieutenant, in our culture we have a saying, the warrior who fights for duty is strong, but the warrior who fights for love is unstoppable. Are you suggesting that human emotional bonds create this love in mixed units? I think that's exactly what happens, sir. When a Thurian warrior genuinely cares about the welfare of his human teammate, when a Zephyrian analyst feels personally responsible for protecting her Vorthon squad leader, when a human marine considers her alien teammates to be family, the entire unit becomes greater than the sum of its parts. The council chamber erupted in discussion as representatives conferred with their species' command structures. Sarah waited patiently, watching the complex interplay of alien politics and military necessity. Admiral Thorne called for order. Lieutenant Chen, assuming we decide to implement your training protocols fleet-wide, what kind of timeline are we looking at? Ma'am, full implementation would require approximately 2 years. We would need to establish training centers at every major coalition base, select and train instructors who understand both human psychology and alien behavioral patterns, and develop species-specific protocols for each major coalition member. And the cost? Sarah activated financial projections. The initial investment would be substantial, approximately 4 billion credits for infrastructure and training. However, the reduced casualty rates and improved mission success would generate savings of over 12 billion credits annually. The numbers were compelling, but Sarah could see resistance in some council members' expressions. The Nexari representative spoke for her collective. This proposal essentially requires all coalition forces to adopt human emotional patterns. Some species may view this as cultural imperialism. With respect, counselor, that's not accurate. We're not asking other species to become more human. We're asking them to develop genuine relationships with their human teammates, which naturally enhances their own species' military capabilities. General Vactor spoke up. Lieutenant, I have observed this phenomenon in my own units that include human personnel. My Zentorian warriors do indeed fight more effectively when they have formed personal bonds with humans. It does not make them less Zentorian. It makes them more effective Zentorians. The debate continued for another hour, covering logistics, implementation strategies, and potential cultural conflicts. Finally, Admiral Thorne called for a preliminary vote. All in favor of authorizing a pilot program to implement Lieutenant Chen's enhanced training protocols across 10% of coalition forces. One by one, the council members registered their votes. When the tally was complete, the measure had passed by a significant margin. Lieutenant Chen, Admiral Thorne announced, "Congratulations, you are hereby promoted to commander and appointed as Director of Enhanced Unit Coordination Training. Your first assignment is to establish pilot programs at 5 major coalition bases." As the council session ended and representatives began filing out, General Vactor approached Sarah. "Commander Chen," he said, using her new rank, "I wanted to personally congratulate you. When I first met you, I saw only a human making excuses. Now I see a warrior who has found a way to make the entire coalition stronger." Sarah touched her left shoulder unconsciously, feeling the familiar scars beneath her uniform. "Thank you, sir. Sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our greatest strengths." "Indeed," the general replied with something that might have been a smile. "Your injury at Proxima was the beginning of a revolution in how we think about warfare itself." As Sarah left the council chambers, she reflected on the long journey from that moment of split-second decision on the bridge of the UES Defiant to this moment of coalition-wide transformation. Her scars would always remind her of the price of caring, but they would also remind her of its power. 2 years later, Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the coalition flagship CNS Unity, watching the largest joint military exercise in galactic history unfold in the space around them. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species moved in perfect coordination, their formations a testament to the revolution in military thinking that had swept through coalition forces. Beside her, Admiral Thorne studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. "Commander, I have to admit that when you first presented your theories about emotional bonding in combat units, I was skeptical. This exercise proves that skepticism was misplaced. The massive fleet exercise involved over 50,000 personnel from every major coalition species, all trained in Sarah's enhanced unit coordination protocols. The results were beyond anything military planners had dared hope for. Unit cohesion was at unprecedented levels, communication between species was seamless, and tactical innovation was happening in real time across the entire fleet. Admiral, if you had told me 3 years ago that I would be watching Zentorian shock troopers risk their lives to protect human engineers, or seeing Nexari hive clusters develop individual emotional attachments to their Thurian teammates, I would have thought you were describing science fiction. And yet there it is," Admiral Thorne replied, gesturing toward the tactical display where mixed species units were executing complex maneuvers with perfect coordination. "The casualty rates we're seeing in these exercises are 40% below anything we've achieved before." A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The holographic image of General Vactor materialized beside them, his forearms spread in the Zentorian gesture of respect. "Commander Chen, Admiral Thorne," he greeted them formally. "I wanted to report that the Zentorian High Command has officially adopted your training protocols as standard procedure for all mixed species units. The improvement in our warriors' effectiveness has been extraordinary." Sarah felt a surge of pride but also of responsibility. The success of her programs had exceeded everyone's expectations, but it had also created new challenges. Units trained in emotional bonding were incredibly effective, but they were also more psychologically fragile when separated or when they suffered casualties. "General, how are your warriors adapting to the emotional components of the training?" "Better than we expected," Vactor admitted. "Zentorians are not naturally emotional beings. But we have discovered that forming protective bonds with other species enhances our natural warrior instincts. My troops now fight not just for victory, but for the safety of beings they genuinely care about. The conversation was interrupted by another communication request. This time, the hologram showed Captain Morrison, Sarah's former commanding officer from the Proxima campaign. His weathered features showed the effects of 2 years of intensive combat operations, but his eyes held warmth as he looked at his former subordinate. "Commander Chen," he said with obvious pride, "I wanted to personally thank you for what you've accomplished. The unit coordination protocols you developed have saved thousands of lives across the coalition." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest at seeing her old captain. It was his life she had saved at Proxima, the moment that had set everything in motion. "Captain, it's good to see you. How are the new protocols working in actual combat situations?" "Better than we could have hoped. Last month, my mixed-species boarding party successfully captured a hegemony battle cruiser without a single casualty. The Thurian warriors, human marines, and Vorthon specialists worked together like they'd been fighting as a family for years. In many ways they had been, Sarah observed. The emotional bonds formed during training create the same psychological dynamics as actual familial relationships. Admiral Thorne activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All units, this is Admiral Thorne. Today's exercise has demonstrated the effectiveness of our enhanced training protocols beyond any doubt. You have shown that the coalition's strength lies not just in our individual capabilities, but in our ability to become more than the sum of our parts." Across the fleet, acknowledgments came back in dozens of languages and communication methods. Sarah listened to the mixture of voices: human speech, Centaurian growls, Nexari harmonic tones, and the clicking of Zephyrian communication, all unified in purpose and commitment. "Commander," Admiral Thorne continued privately, "there's something else I need to discuss with you. Coalition intelligence has been analyzing hegemony communications, and we're seeing evidence that they're trying to develop their own version of enhanced unit coordination." Sarah felt a chill of concern. "Ma'am, are they having any success?" "Not so far. It appears that the hegemony's authoritarian structure and lack of genuine emotional bonds between species is preventing them from replicating our results. But they're trying, which means your innovations have become a strategic advantage that our enemies are actively working to counter." The implications were sobering. The enhanced training protocols had given the coalition a significant military advantage, but that advantage would only last as long as it remained unique to them. "There's more," Admiral Thorne added. "We've received reports that some hegemony units are actually surrendering when faced with coalition forces trained in your protocols. The level of coordination and mutual protection they're witnessing is apparently demoralizing to forces that rely purely on discipline and fear." Captain Morrison's image nodded in agreement. "I can confirm that, Admiral. During our last engagement, a full hegemony squad surrendered after watching my unit risk everything to evacuate a wounded Thurian. One of the prisoners told our interrogators that they'd never seen anything like it." Sarah moved to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the war against the hegemony continued, but the nature of that war had fundamentally changed. Coalition forces were no longer just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting to protect the bonds they had formed with each other. "Commander," General Vactor said, "I wanted you to know that the Zentorian War Council has voted to award you our highest military honor. The Velthar Cross is traditionally only given to Zentorian warriors, but your sacrifice at Proxima and your subsequent innovations have earned you a place in our warrior traditions." The honor was unprecedented. No non-Zentorian had ever received the Velthar Cross, and Sarah understood the significance of the gesture. "General, I'm deeply honored, but I want you to know that everything I've accomplished has been built on the foundation of what others taught me. Captain Morrison showed me what it meant to lead with integrity. Colonel Vextar taught me that strength comes from understanding rather than judgment, and my injured shoulder reminds me every day that sometimes the most important victories require personal sacrifice." She touched the familiar scars beneath her uniform, feeling the phantom pain that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. "The truth is," she continued, "human emotional bonding isn't superior to other species' approaches to warfare. It's just different. But when we combine human emotional investment with Centaurian discipline, Thurian resilience, Vorthon precision, and the tactical brilliance of every other coalition species, We create something that's greater than any of us could achieve alone. Admiral Thorne smiled. Commander, that might be the most profound military philosophy I've ever heard. And it all started because a young lieutenant was willing to throw herself in front of a plasma bolt to save her captain. As the massive fleet exercise concluded and ships began returning to their home bases, Sarah remained on the observation deck, watching the controlled chaos of military logistics. Each ship carried personnel who had learned to see their alien teammates not as tools or resources, but as family worth protecting. The war against the hegemony would continue, but the coalition was no longer the same force that had begun that conflict. They had become something new, something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly unified military force bound together not by conquest or fear, but by genuine care for each other's welfare. Sarah's scars ached with phantom pain, a constant reminder of the price she had paid for that first moment of protective instinct. But as she watched human Marines laughing with Centaurian warriors, and Thurian engineers working alongside Vorthan technicians, she knew that Price had purchased something invaluable. The galaxy had seen many military alliances throughout history, but it had never seen anything like the Coalition, and force that fought not just for victory but for love.